Well, hello, colleagues. Livelihoods for Resilient Staff. So, this presentation is to help us understand how to prevent fraud and corruption. And while this is always important, this will be especially important as we've completed our cash transfers. We talked a little about this before doing the cash transfers, but I'd like to provide a little bit more details as we move into FY21, and we may be preparing ourselves for a more humanitarian response. While this presentation does say Catholic Relief Services, I do think this is pertinent to all partners, CRS, MCS, and others, and I think would merit a quick review as you prepare for this year ahead. I would also suggest that one of the things that we want to look at is that we need to understand that fraud and prevention entails all parts. It entails participation and diligence on the behalf of operations, finance, human resources, monitoring and evaluation, and programming staff. So what do we hope to do? Well, this presentation will talk about avoiding fraud and corruptions, especially humanitarian operations. What is a conflict of interest, segregation of duties, what is corruption, and reporting requirements of all staff. So any of our humanitarian work should really be found on two principles: transparency and accountability. So transparency is how do we make our decisions? How did we prioritize our needs? How do we select the staff, vendors, and beneficiaries? Accountability is that we make sure we're using our resources, CRSs, and the donors' resources, or MCS resources, to make sure we're using it for the best use. Segregation of duties. A segregation is when you have more than one person required to complete a task. So within the CRS systems, and I believe in many of our partners' systems, there is kind of segregation of duties that are built into the system. So that includes procurement, hiring, finance, program implementation. So a conflict of interest arises when an employee can influence organization operations or business decisions in ways that could result in a personal financial benefit to the employee or their family. Yeah. In other words, an individual's business decisions are influenced by an individual's personal interests. So you can think about this as real or perceived, but you may have a relative or a member of your church or member of your religious community that's applying to be a staff member or even potentially a vendor. Those are good things to kind of share before you actually participate in any decisions that that person or that organization has an interest. So again, a lot of it is a perception issue as much as there is actual conflict of interest. We often talk about this in three ways when we talk about fraud and corruption: how to prevent it, how to detect it, and how to respond to it. And we'll cover these over the course of this presentation. So for procurement, tenders are advertised. Every vendor has a chance to apply through a competitive process. Vendors require due diligence. You need to go and visit to make sure they actually exist. Do they have good practices? Procurement teams should be checking references for new vendors. Samples are reviewed by committee for instance, non-food item procurements, bid committees, multiple people reviewing offers and selecting vendors. Vendors are required to declare any conflict of interest, and bidding committee members sign a bid committee code of conduct. So again, several different processes we have here. So again, right from the advertising to the review to the final awarding of our procurements, we need to be aware of. Prohibited activities, so things that you cannot do when being part of a process, or even if you're aware of it and sharing any information outside of your organization, is some of these. So Sharing price or budget information with the vendor, telling a vendor, hey, in my budget, I have X amount of dollars. Requesting vendor advice or input in developing specifications or bill of quantities or budgets. Giving a vendor preferential treatment, advance notice, or extra information. Accepting or requesting gifts or kickbacks from vendors. And receiving personal benefit of any kind. So within CRS, these are grounds for termination. So this means if, for instance, suddenly you have a procurement process you're undertaking and you're being asked by that vendor to go out to dinner, this would be a receiving a personal benefit of any kind. If they offer you any gifts, then you cannot accept it, or money, such as would be an example of a kickback or a bribe. For finance, we do this by having multiple levels of reviews. We have a segregation of duties in terms of preparing, approving distribution payments. We have segregation of duties in cash management, and we have bank reconciliations. And I say this because I think a lot of us really do think about fraud and corruption in the hands of finance, but it happens a lot of different places, just not in finance, but it can happen in procurement, it can happen in HR, it can happen in programming. In HR, we do this by trying to prevent fraud and corruption by staff or positions are advertised. All candidates take the same written test. Hiring committee interviews and recommends a candidate. Staff cannot manage a family member. Performance review processes and probation processes. Those are some of the examples that CRS uses in Ethiopia and globally. For managing our relationship with partners, of course, we have to do an assessment of new partners, preferably before we would write them into any proposals, but there are some exceptions to that. There's the monitoring visits that should happen, training, capacity building, documentation review. I think that's probably what we often think about when we talk about reviewing things. And then there's accompaniment. So for CRS's internal management, we should be providing a training on fraud and corruption at least once per year. We need to make sure the mechanisms are in place and each office and staff know about them. This also includes projects. Set high standards, put good policies in place to protect CRS or your organization, such as segregation of duties. And management should be available to hear concerns, follow up, escalate issues to region or headquarters or whatever your organization's response are. If you'd like to, you can take a quick moment to pause and ask you these questions. What would I do if I have a potential conflict of interest? What should I do if I see a situation in the office that seems like a conflict of interest? So if you'd like to, you can put this on pause, reflect on this, maybe jot down a couple ideas, and come back to the presentation. So again, if you have a conflict of interest, you need to inform your supervisor, even if you think you can make a good decision. You may not participate in a decision that could affect you personally. You're required to report immediately if you see a situation in office that seems questionable. Who do you report to? We'll talk about that later on. Do you know vendors are also required to declare any conflict of interest? That's actually also the responsibility of our vendors. Within CRS, and this is also available to partners if they see any issues within their own organizations or with any CRS staff, is we have a couple of ways of doing this. One is there's a ethics point hotline. You'll see this number here. You can call that collect, which means you'll call and they will accept your phone call and that will not be charged to you. Ethics points online, you can see there. You also have you can make your complaints online. Just to be aware, that does go to a third party. In other words, that goes to a company who manages our responses. You can make your complaints directly to your supervisors. Now, when we have this, we should be kind of clear about what are some of the things that you would want to report. So you would see things like auditing or accounting matters, embezzlement or fraud, falsification of contracts, reports, and records, improper supply or contractor activities, theft, inappropriate use of resources both by CRS and partners, other illegal or criminal uses of CRS and partners' property or assets, and kickbacks, bribery, or improper gifts. So again, these are some of the exact examples of when you would want to contact your supervisor or report any complaints to the ethics points. Now, I also decided to add this additional sheet because within CRS, we actually do have a fraud allegation policy. It's called the FAM policy. For CRS staff, you can find this on the CRS Global webpage. You can also find this for LRO staff at CRS on the Dropbox. What's important to know are, I'm not going to go over in great details of what that policy is, but I want you to remember these kind of 4 things. If staff observes something that could be potentially fraudulent, the staff should report it to the chief of party, country representative, or via ethics point. So if you see something that does not look right, it's your responsibility and your obligation to report that up. You do not, and please do not go necessarily to try to confirm the validity or scope of the suspected fraud. If you go about doing that, it could further compromise if there's further reviews or inquiries. So it's better to report up. I think I see something a little suspicious, and then it can be managed at a senior management level. Once reported, the country representative will report it to the region, Nairobi, and headquarters, who will coordinate the review and communications to the donor. That's important for us to know is once we have identified things, it's kind of taken out of the hands of the country program, and it's managed outside of the country program in a large part. And that means organizing any pre-inquiries, inquiries. Later on, we'll talk about even investigations. And then how do we communicate to this donor? We do have very good relationships with our donors, USAID especially. And there's ways that CRS and USAID have agreed on how to report fraud and also in what timeframes. There are several steps that have to be followed. Do not use the word investigation, as it is a specific step in the review process and has very specific connotations. So when we talk to investigation, it's now kind of gone beyond a review or an inquiry. It's a very legal term, and so we would prefer not to use the word on a fraud investigation. But right now, the terminology we would say is we're looking into fraud allegation. Again, it's just an allegation. It's not saying it has happened, but it's saying that we're looking into it. So again, I thank you very much. As we go into these times of uncertainty where we're looking at responding to COVID-19, we're looking at pests, and we're looking at communal violence, LRO will be engaging more and more with humanitarian response. And that's one reason I really wanted to take this opportunity to highlight this, because whenever there's in-kind, or voucher, or cash, are the problems that we need to really be made diligent on. And then lastly, you can, if you have any question about this, you can always kind of remember the general mantra of no surprises. Report up if you see anything. It's a lot better to report up something and to find out that there was a misunderstanding or that there was some needs for clarifications and there was no wrongdoing than it to unfold that there was a wrongdoing and you were aware of it but did not raise concerns. So again, thank you very much.